Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about the magical electional opportunities that we're going to have between the Virgo New Moon on September 20th until the Aries Full Moon on October 1st. So today we kind of have a nice arrangement where there are three electional charts per the typical locations that I scrutinize, North America, Western Europe, and Australia, and then one of those three opportunities is actually going to be one that all three locations will be able to share, which is a little bit rare, so that's fun. So kind of keeping a little bit more in touch with the astrological weather, we'll say, recently there's been a little bit of some change-ups that have kind of opened up and closed down some different places in the sky for us to kind of work with. So by the time this video goes public, Jupiter will have station direct in Capricorn, which is good, so we'll be able to use Jupiter for a little while, at least until Jupiter comes a little bit too close to the conjunction of Saturn to be usable, so we'll have that. And then, of course, on September 29th, we'll have Saturn in Capricorn station direct as well, which will open Saturn back up for some talismanic opportunities and, to be utilized in talismanic collections, at least after the Mars-Saturn square has separated enough to give us some room there. And of course, speaking of Mars, we have sort of traded the Jupiter and Saturn retrogrades for a Mars retrograde, so Mars will kind of be off the table for talismanic elections until it stations direct several months from now. But that all being said, let's go ahead and get into the elections we're going to be talking about. Our first election is, of course, for North American continent, and it's going to be for September 20th at around 7:30 in the morning, kind of right around sunrise. And here we're focused on an 18th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now, the 18th Lunar Mansion is a healing-oriented talisman, and it is healing-oriented in that its modality is a little bit more about devouring and curing illness than it is about preventing illness from taking place in the first place. So kind of keep that in mind if you are thinking about having a healing-oriented talisman. This could also be one that you keep but kind of put to sleep between periods of illness. So this could be kind of useful for individuals who suffer from kind of like a chronic condition that flares up to help, reduce or deal with those flare-ups once they happen. But it's probably not going to help you, prevent those flare-ups. It's not really about preventative medicine in the way that like the 10th Lunar Mansion is or something like that. So taking a look at our election chart here, what we wanted to do is, well, we've got the moon here in the 18th Lunar Mansion, and she's in the second house, which is not usually a house that I typically like for her to be in very much, but it's not like a terrible house for her to be in. It's just one of like the less ideal ones, I guess we could say. And at this time that she's here, she is applying the square to Venus, who is, of course, the lesser benefic planet, who is all about healing and, conducive to healing and health, with Venus being placed in the 11th house in the horoscope here. At the same time, we have Libra rising, which puts our attention back on Venus as the lady of the first house, and Venus is unafflicted by Saturn or Mars. She's kind of approaching this trine with retrograde Mars, but trines aren't terrible with malefic planets. And then kind of our final piece of the puzzle is the sun conjunct the ascendant here, so kind of bringing that sun, that vivifying life force, to the individual that the talisman is supposed to help. So we have kind of that health aspect coming into it. The only kind of part to worry about, or kind of the negative aspect here in this chart, is that we have this Mercury-Mars opposition happening, and it is a little bit more muted in that it's kind of away from an angle, but Mercury is being opposed by Mars in the first house. And I tried to work with this to get Mercury more into the second house in the election, but to do that you'd have to trade the Libra ascendant for a Virgo ascendant, and then that would make Mercury the ruler of the first house being opposed by Mars, and that's more dangerous, or kind of like more eminently worrisome than having the Mars-Mercury opposition happen, away from the ascendant and with Mercury not ruling the ascendant. So this is sort of the compromise chart between that. So, if you aren't comfortable with that opposition kind of happening within the first house, totally fine. Don't use it if you don't want to. That's the same for all the elections that I share. If you don't feel comfortable with it, don't use it. But that's kind of the trade-off that you have with this one. So one other thing that I wanted to mention about the 18th Lunar Mansion is that as you saw on the card, the signification associated with the mansion is the horn of a stag, which can be a little bit difficult to get. If you live in like a rural area, you may be able to find some just wandering the woods. But there's some other ways to get some that aren't as difficult. The first thing you can utilize is ammonium carbonate, which you should actually be able to find online. It's a baking ingredient or in specialty baking stores, so look there. Or you can check pet stores. A lot of different dog treats, or they're like specific dog treats or dog chews that are made from deer horn or elk horn, and you can use those as well. So the next election that we're going to talk about for the North American continent takes place on September 28th at around 5:30 p.m. And this is an opportunity for a 26th Lunar Mansion talisman. And I'm not sure if we've ever really covered the 26th Lunar Mansion or seen an opportunity for it. But the 26th Lunar Mansion is one that's really more about repairing relationships or helping to form relationships. And I know that a lot of times when I talk about like repairing relationships, when I talk about astrological magic within like a relationship context, I feel like what ends up happening is that it comes out to overtly like romantic relationship, and that's not necessarily what we mean. Though there are some talismans that are much more like romantic or even sexual in their imagery. Not all of them are, and all of them can be or have to be used that way. And the 26th Lunar Mansion is a good example of that. This one can be, just for any kind of relationships. It can be, for parental relationships, repairing or developing a relationship between parent and child. Maybe if there's like an estrangement there. It can be used for romance and, repairing marriages or romantic relationships. That can work too. It can be just for repairing friendships that have maybe experienced kind of a gap or some rift has formed, whether for some specific instance or something that happened, or because of just time kind of pulling people apart. It can be used for that as well. So what we have going on here in the election chart is we have the moon placed in the 26th Lunar Mansion at 3 degrees Pisces, and she's on the ascendant, back where I like her, in any sort of magical election chart. And at this time, she's applying loosely kind of the sextile to Jupiter. It's a little bit wide, but it's next and it'll do the job. And Jupiter is also the ruler of the first house, placed here in Capricorn. And Jupiter is unafflicted. We're getting kind of close to the conjunction of Saturn and the square of Mars. So this is probably like as close to these two as I would use Jupiter, which is a little bit unfortunate, really, because we only just kind of got Jupiter back from being retrograde, and we have just kind of like this small window to really use anything Jupiter related before we kind of run into like this malefic crucible with the conjunction of Saturn and the square with Mars. So basically, like through the rest of the winter, Jupiter is going to be going through a rough patch. So thoughts and prayers for Jupiter there. One thing that I would have liked to do with this election is got Venus to be more angular, but she's already fallen off the angle into the Cadent 6th house. And the reason why that is because I'd have to switch out the Pisces ascendant for an Aquarius ascendant, which makes Saturn, who is retrograde, the ruler of the first house. And I don't like to have retrograde planets as rulers of the first house, if at all possible, so that's why that didn't happen. And there is one more election for North America, but it's the one that all three locations share, so we're going to kind of circle back around to that one at the end and talk about it, within each location. So for now, we're going to move on to Western Europe. And our first chart for Western Europe takes place on September 20th at around 7:53 a.m. And we're trying to get the first degree of Libra rising is why we're setting it for this time. And one other thing, for those of you who have kind of watched this series for a while, you're probably like, the lighting looks kind of weird today. Like, what's up with that in this video? That's because I'm actually recording during the day, which is rare. I usually record these at like midnight, so that's what's going on. It's the sun's out now, and that's unusual for me. It also explains why there's no cats here. They're running around. So here, this little chart is actually an opportunity for a 17th Lunar Mansion talisman. This is one I think we've talked about once before, but the 17th Lunar Mansion is one that's about protection from theft, and kind of, protection of property, particularly like movable property, movable goods, money, and protection of a household itself from people who, kind of want to enter to cause harm. So burglars, things like that. Are anybody that we're trying to keep out, anybody who means us harm, but it is more specifically oriented towards the protection of property, for like keeping property in the home and for anti-removal property basically. And in this election here we have the moon in the 17th Lunar Mansion, and she's placed in the second house. Again, not a house that I really like to put her in a lot of times, but I actually I like it here more. I like the moon in the second house more in this context than I do in other contexts, because this is a talisman that's for the protection of movable goods, of money, which the second house signifies. So there's kind of like a nice symbolic overlap there that makes this placement a little bit better than it would be without it. So second house is a little bit unideal for moon placements, but in context or within the context of property and money, either protection or generating, it's better than if it was something else. Like in our 18th Lunar Mansion talisman, the moon's the second house. That's not bad, per se. It's not great. But it loses that symbolic edge because the 18th Lunar Mansion is not about the preservation of money. It's about the preservation of health. And we kind of, speaking of that 18th Lunar Mansion talisman, we kind of have the same thing going on. You'll notice the framework is very similar. We have an early Libra rising because we don't want the late Virgo rising. And we get the sun conjoined the ascendant at the same time, which brings a lot of light and protection to the individual who is going to use it. We especially have kind of like this dual rulership of Venus ruling the first house and the second house, and that is who the moon is applying to next. We still kind of have that same square in effect. And of course, we're still dealing with this Mercury-Mars opposition that we can't get rid of for the next couple of days, and it's taking place a little bit more, still kind of within the first house, or conjunct the cusp of the second house, which can be, a little bit problematic for the theme of the chart or for the goal of the chart. So you'll keep that in mind. But the moon in the Lunar Mansion placed in the second house will bring a lot of protection to it. And Venus, who is the ruler of the second house, is not involved really in this configuration at all. So kind of safe, doing her own thing. The second electional opportunity for Western Europe takes place just a couple days later, September 22nd, still kind of that same time frame, 7:50, 7:55-ish. I'm really into the sunrise charts this cycle. So the chart itself is kind of mostly unchanged from the previous chart. It's just 2 days later. So what we've done is we've traded in the moon square Venus in Leo to the moon trine Venus in Leo. Now she's in 6 degree Sagittarius, but we're kind of keeping a lot of the same things. Venus rules the first house from the 11th house. The sun's on the ascendant. Everything's pretty much the same. And this is a chart for the 20th Lunar Mansion. And the 20th Lunar Mansion is one that is kind of more traditionally or textbook used for hunting. So if you hunt, or if you're a hunter, or somebody who is a hunter, then this talisman is totally fine. You can use it that way. You definitely always use them kind of by their textbook definitions, or you can kind of extrapolate that a little bit further. And I tend to use the 20th Lunar Mansion, or recommend people use the 20th Lunar Mansion for like goal setting. Like hunting a goal, or trying to achieve a thing. Just sort of like any kind of long-term goal planning that is something that requires more effort to accomplish or to attain. And the reason for this is because the image of the 20th Lunar Mansion is of an archer, and there's just sort of like that long-sightedness involved in archery, and the kind of like the precision involved in that. Where I feel like this is a good overlap, but it also has a couple of other secondary uses. One of the secondary uses is protection of travelers. So if you're traveling, this is a good mansion to have in your back pocket, which of course makes sense if it's for hunters, because they're out in the woods all by themselves, so they need somebody to watch their back, and why not have this talisman to help you from falling into random wood holes or whatnot. And another secondary utilization is that it's good for taming of disobedient or wild beasts. So you can join me in my experiment to like ensorcel cats to not be mean to one another. So we'll see how that goes. So just like North America, Western Europe has one more chart that is of course the same, and we'll talk about that one more to the end. So moving on to Australia, talismanic opportunities right now. The first one is for September 21st at around 4:20 in the morning, so well before sunrise. And this is another opportunity for an 18th Lunar Mansion talisman. So Australia and North America will both have 18th Lunar Mansion opportunities. The chart set for Western Europe was actually that 17th Lunar Mansion talisman, and Australia gets kind of the better end of the deal in this regard, as their chart is set up much more fortunately, in my opinion, than the North American chart, which wasn't bad, but kind of had to struggle, or had to balance that kind of Mars-Mercury opposition occurring. Here we don't have to worry about that. Here we have the moon in the 18th Lunar Mansion, and she's still applying that square with Venus, of course, lesser benefic planet, conducive to health, we want that. And in this chart, at this time, we have Venus actually conjoined the ascendant, so we're really kind of bringing that in and pulling that in for for this talisman. And because of this sort of like dual signification of Venus in Leo with the ascendant in Leo, and probably even somewhat to a degree with the North American chart, which had this one on the ascendant, but this one especially, this chart could be really great. This talisman could be really great to help with any sort of like Leo area conditions. So like this area here, the heart, the back, any of those problems, or like any problems that afflict those areas, this talisman can be really helpful because we have that signification kind of embedded into it. It'll be helpful for kind of any condition because that's what the 18th Lunar Mansion does, but because the election is set up with some of these symbols already in it, specifically those Leo areas or those sun areas are going to be more easily impacted by or more helped by this talisman. So keep that in mind. The ruler of the first house is the sun because we have Leo on the ascendant. The sun's down here in 28 degrees Leo, or I'm sorry, 28 degrees Virgo. We can just always be in Leo all the time. That'd be fine too. And the sun is unafflicted. We're past this trine with Saturn, which is fine, even if it was applying. And the sun's, just averse to Mars, and the sun's doing fine, so that's good. But there's just kind of like less to say about this chart because it's much better. But this chart is definitely the more idealized version between this one and the North American version. Our second talismanic election opportunity for Australia, and sort of its unique one this cycle, is going to be on the next day, September 22nd, at around 9:10, 9:12 is what this chart is set for a.m. And here we have the opportunity for a 19th Lunar Mansion talisman. So this was, the 20th Lunar Mansion talismanic collection from Western Europe. And the 19th Lunar Mansion is one that we've talked about before. It is, on the one hand, one that is generally useful for magical safeguarding. So, if you want certain magical protections or protection from magic or outside sources, then this is a good chart or a good talisman to have on your side. But it's also very woman-focused, and it's used for uterine health care, for female reproductive health care. So keep that in mind if you're struggling with some sort of healthcare issue, whether, irregular cycles or, intense pain, intense cramping, anything like that, consider the 19th Mansion to help you out. And taking a look at the election chart itself, we have the moon on the ascendant in the 19th Lunar Mansion, and here she's applying the trine to Venus in Leo. And I like that the two more female-coded planets are very angular in this chart and are aspecting one another for the 19th Lunar Mansion. That feels very appropriate for it. And the ruler of the first house is, of course, Jupiter, because we have Sagittarius rising, and Jupiter is down here, conjoining the cusp of the second house, far enough away from the conjunction of Saturn and the square Mars to not really be an issue right now, but like I mentioned before, that will become increasingly a problem as we move forward in time, so make the best of it while you still can. Yes, time? Taboo.
I really love cats. I'm thinking about cats again and again and again and again and again.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that electional chart that all three locations will share, and that's going to be an election for the 27th Lunar Mansion. And the 27th Lunar Mansion is one that I know we have not talked about before because my personal experience with this mansion is very, very limited. Partly because its image and its nature is very dualistic, which can be a little off-putting, but also because you know how it is whenever you're trying to find an election for a thing that you want to do, it's never there. So finally we have an opportunity for it, and I'm excited to kind of see and play around with it, but I thought I would let you guys know about it as well in case you felt adventurous as well. So the 27th Lunar Mansion, like I said, is kind of very dualistic in its nature. It's kind of very it's kind of equally capable of both good and bad in the same way. So you always want to make sure that the election for it is more aligned with your goal. So, for instance, the texts tell us that the 27th Lunar Mansion is good for healing illness, but also for cursing people. It's good for increasing profit and merchandise, but also for destroying springs, wells, and crops. So it kind of has this equal overlap to where it can be applied, fortunately to that thing and unfortunately to that thing. So you want to make sure that, if you're you're aiming for the more fortunate manifestations of it, that your chart is aligned with that. And so your first step to do that is have a waxing moon, because the waxing moon is for gain. Whereas if you made this during a more waning moon phase, you'd be leaning more into the more negative approach or the more negative outcomes associated with the chart. So, that's one way to look at it. Making sure the moon is applying to a benefic planet is another way to make sure you're getting those more positive outcomes. Whereas if you had the moon applied to a more negative planet, more malefic one, you'd be leaning back into the more negative expressions of it. So just some little ways you can make it work. And then, of course, how you approach the ritual and the intention and the imagery and, your petition to the talisman is going to have a major impact on it as well. So as long as those three things are sort of all aligned towards one specific goal, you shouldn't have a problem. And so this chart gives you two of those things right off the bat. We have the moon in the waxing phase. We're going from a new moon to a full moon, so already we're oriented more towards growth and gain. And in all of the elections, we'll have the moon apply the sextile to Jupiter in Capricorn, who is a benefic planet who wants to do benefic things. So we'll have that aspect of it as well. The only thing left is to provide the goal or the intention for the talisman. So everything should be fine towards growth and gain. So there's a lot there that you can utilize it with, especially with there's the merchandise version of it. So if you're in sales or you're self-employed and you want to bring in more income, definitely do that. There's also the healing illness aspect of it, and because the imagery of the talisman itself, which features an angel more or less with a vessel, with a dish of some kind, it's almost more useful for it almost seems like the image is applying it more for like medicine making. Like it's good to have this talisman to empower medicine to heal, rather than have the talisman heal directly like we would with, say, the 18th or the 10th Lunar Mansion, which are more oriented towards kind of direct intervention from the spirit itself. This one seems more like let the spirit help you make better medicines to heal people, which is totally fine. It's just a different medical modality. And even if you're not using it in that way, if you don't have the means to make your own medicines for one reason or another, that's totally fine. You could still get something out of it by trying to get the spirit to kind of directly intervene for health. It just doesn't seem that that's kind of like the mode that it's most used to, or the mode that's most natural to it. So just kind of keep that in mind. And here we have the moon. And here we have the moon in the 27th Lunar Mansion conjoined the ascendant. We've got that early Pisces rising, the moon applying the sextile to Jupiter, as I was saying, with Jupiter also being the ruler of the first house, unafflicted by Saturn or Mars right now. So definitely want to make sure that we lean into that energy while we can still get it. And it's just overall kind of like a very stable, very kind of like growth-oriented chart. There's not a whole lot going on with it, which is a little unusual. It's a little bit more of a serene chart than we're used to seeing in 2020. So that same 27th Lunar Mansion election in Western Europe looks like this. Here, September 29th at around 23:50, so right before midnight. And here we have a little bit of a different setup, but we do have the waxing moon, of course, and the moon's still applying the sextile to Jupiter. But now we've got the moon as the ruler of the first house with Cancer rising, which just puts us more focus on the moon. Make sure the moon's not afflicted, which she isn't, because we're talking about a talismanic election. Itself, we would never have the moon afflicted in such a thing. So everything kind of checks out there. Like I said, just kind of like a more serene chart, but very quick. That's what it is. So kind of circling back around from where we started, the 27th Lunar Mansion talisman in North America, it looks like this here, taking place on December 29th at around 6:30-ish p.m. This is set for 6:24. And here, it's very, very similar to the Australian version, but we're just kind of in different degrees. And now we've got the moon kind of towards the tail end of the 27th Lunar Mansion, conjoin the ascendant with applying that sextile to Jupiter, who's also the ruler of the first house. Jupiter unafflicted for now. It's safe from these malefic planets that are sort of closing in around it. So those are all the talismanic collections that I have for you this 2-week period. 3 for everybody, and 1 that everybody gets to share. So that's kind of fun. So everybody, good luck, with your talismanic creations. May it go smoothly, and may you prosper always. And I'll see everybody again on the Aries Full Moon.